You ever had someone pull away from you? Maybe a partner, a friend, you feel that distance, that wall going up, and you chase. You try to break through, but the more you push, the further they go, right? Now, what if I told you the secret wasn't in chasing, but in stepping back, in walking away not as a game, not as manipulation, but as a powerful shift in energy that forces the avoidant to face their own fears? Because here's the truth, no contact isn't about them, it's about you. But ironically, when you focus on yourself, the avoidant who ran from connection starts feeling something they never expected, the pull to return. Avoidants live in a world where they control the emotional distance. They get their power from knowing you're always there. The moment you break that pattern, their brain goes into uncertainty. And guess what? The human mind hates uncertainty. That's when curiosity, doubt, and eventually regret start creeping in. Think about it, we're wired for certainty. The brain constantly seeks patterns, routines, and predictable outcomes because that's how it ensures survival. When we know something is always available, we don't question it. It's just there. The sun rises, gravity pulls us down, and the person who always reaches out will always reach out. But what happens when that certainty is suddenly removed? The brain panics. It starts searching for answers. And this is where the real shift happens with avoidance. Avoidants are used to controlling the emotional dynamic in a relationship. They decide when to engage and when to withdraw, usually keeping people at arm's length just enough to feel safe. This isn't necessarily because they don't care, it's because deep down, closeness represents a risk. Maybe they learned early on that love comes with conditions. Maybe they grew up in a space where vulnerability was punished instead of embraced. Whatever the cause, they've developed a strategy, keep emotions in check, stay in control, and avoid situations where they might get hurt. Now, if someone is always available to them, texting, calling, checking in, they never have to question that presence. It's predictable, and that predictability makes them feel like they have control. But the moment you step away, the moment you stop texting first, stop waiting for them, stop being the reliable presence, that's when their subconscious mind kicks into overdrive. At first, they may feel relieved. I knew they'd back off eventually. But then as time passes, something else happens. A little voice starts whispering in the back of their mind. Why aren't they reaching out? Then that whisper grows louder. Wait, are they moving on? And before they know it, the very control they thought they had is slipping away. Here's the kicker. Avoidants don't typically realize what they value until it's gone. Because they avoid deep emotional processing, they don't sit and think, wow, I really care about this person, at least not when everything feels secure. But once the security vanishes, once their routine is disrupted, they start to feel something they don't expect, loss. Not because you're punishing them, not because you're playing games, but because their mind is now forced to reassess the entire situation. And that reassessment, that's the crack in the armor that makes them start showing up. Avoidants don't fear you, they fear emotions. They fear attachment, vulnerability, and the intensity of connection. The moment things start feeling too close, too deep, or too intimate, their automatic response is to create space. This isn't always a conscious decision, it's a deeply ingrained survival mechanism. They may not even fully understand why they pull away, why they suddenly feel suffocated when nothing external has changed. It's an internal reaction built over time, reinforced by past experiences where emotional closeness may have felt overwhelming or even unsafe. But here's where things get interesting. When an avoidant distances themselves, they expect a particular reaction pursuit. They anticipate that you'll reach out, ask questions, seek reassurance, or try to reestablish the connection. And in their mind, this justifies their withdrawal. It reinforces their belief that closeness equals pressure. However, when you do the opposite, when you step back, when you stop initiating, when you give them the space they didn't even realize they needed, something shifts. At first, they might feel relief. That initial sense of finally I can breathe might wash over them. But then the silence sets in, the absence of your messages, your presence, your effort, it starts to create a void. And here's the paradox, avoidants avoid emotional intensity, but they are not immune to emotional impact. They just process it differently. Unlike someone who immediately recognizes loss and reacts, an avoidant needs time. They need space, not to escape the connection, but to truly feel it. When they're no longer distracted by the cycle of push and pull, when they don't have the safety net of knowing you're always there, waiting, they have to sit with themselves. And that is uncomfortable. Without the external stimulus of your pursuit, they are left with their own thoughts, their own emotions, and most importantly, their own fears. For the first time, they might start questioning their own actions. Did I misjudge this? Was I too quick to run? Why do I actually miss them? These thoughts don't come instantly, but they build over time. This is why space is so powerful. It forces the avoidant to experience what they were trying to avoid all along, emotional reflection. The very thing they were running from, deep connection and emotional intimacy, starts to make itself known in its absence. And the moment they begin to realize that the distance doesn't bring them peace, but rather an unsettling emptiness, is the moment they start considering coming back. Not because they were chased, not because they were pressured, but because they had the space to recognize, on their own terms, what truly mattered. People are wired to desire what they can't easily have. It's not just about relationships, it's human nature. The moment something becomes scarce, its perceived value skyrockets. Think about the last time you wanted something just because it was limited. Maybe it was a product that sold out fast, a job opportunity that only a few could get, or even a person who seemed unattainable. The psychology behind this is simple. We assume that if something isn't easily available, it must be special. And this principle applies directly to avoiding relationships. When you are always available to someone, always texting first, always waiting, always showing up, they don't have to think about you. You become part of the background, something predictable, something certain. And certainty, while comforting, doesn't ignite desire. It doesn't create longing. Avoidants in particular don't respond to certainty the way securely attached people do. Instead of feeling safe in it, they take it for granted. It's not because they are bad people. It's because they are wired to maintain emotional distance. If they know you're always there, they don't have to engage deeply. They can keep you at arm's length and still feel in control. But the second that certainty is removed, everything changes. Suddenly, they start to question. Wait, why aren't they reaching out? Why aren't they chasing me like they always do? Did they move on? These questions create a sense of loss, even if they weren't fully appreciating what they had before. And loss is one of the most powerful psychological triggers. It forces the mind to reevaluate. It forces someone to see value in what they previously overlooked. This is why no contact is so effective. It shifts the power dynamic. Instead of you being the one constantly proving your worth, you become the one they have to think about, wonder about, and eventually miss. And here's the most fascinating part. Avoidants don't chase people they feel are emotionally dependent on them. They chase those who seem independent, strong, and most importantly, slightly out of reach. It's not about playing games or manipulating emotions. It's about understanding that people only value what they feel they could lose. When you stop being overly available, you stop being an option they can take for granted. You become someone they now have to earn. And when an avoidant feels that shift, when they realize they no longer hold all the control, that's when they start showing up in ways they never did before. Avoidants don't come back to people who make them feel pressured or trapped. They come back to people who make them feel emotionally safe. This is the biggest misunderstanding people have when dealing with avoidance. The instinct is often to demand closeness, to ask for reassurance, to try and force connection through conversations about feelings. But for an avoidant, that level of intensity often triggers the exact response you don't want: withdrawal. They don't pull away because they don't care. They pull away because emotional pressure feels overwhelming to them. When you step back and focus on yourself instead of chasing them, something shifts. You stop being a source of pressure and start becoming a source of peace. And here's the key. Avoidants don't just fear closeness. They fear losing their independence in a relationship. When they sense that someone can be in their life without demanding too much, they feel safer. And when they feel safe, they can actually start engaging emotionally instead of running away. No contact creates a dynamic where the avoidant is no longer reacting to external pressure, but instead has time to reflect on what the connection actually meant to them. It removes the external expectation and allows them to sit with their own feelings they often suppress when someone is actively chasing them. This is why avoidants often return not to the person who begged them to stay, but to the person who let them go. Because letting them go signals that you are not trying to control them. And control, even when it's coming from a place of love, is what they fear most. Another powerful shift happens when you embrace emotional safety within yourself. When you are secure, grounded, and focused on your own growth, you become the type of person who is naturally attractive not just to the avoidant, but in general. People gravitate toward those who exude confidence and peace. And when the avoidant sees that you are no longer emotionally dependent on them for validation, their fear of closeness begins to fade. Instead of viewing the relationship as something they need to escape from, they start seeing it as something they want to be a part of. This is why true power lies not in convincing someone to stay, but in showing them that being with you is a choice, not an obligation. When an avoidant realizes that you can offer connection without suffocation, love without pressure, and presence without desperation, they feel something they rarely experience: emotional safety. And that is what truly makes them show up. The real victory in no contact isn't making them come back. It's realizing you don't need them to. This is where the real transformation happens, not just in your relationships, but in your entire mindset. Because when you truly internalize this, everything changes. You stop waiting, you stop checking your phone, you stop analyzing their behavior. And when that happens, you reclaim your power. Most people enter no contact with one secret hope: that it will make the avoidant realize what they lost and come running back. And sometimes that happens. But here's the truth: if your happiness is still dependent on whether they return, you haven't truly leveled up. The goal is not to wait for them. The goal is to become the kind of person who doesn't need them to return. Not in a bitter, I don't care way, but in a deeply empowered, self-sufficient way. Now think about this: when you first met them, you weren't obsessing over them. You weren't thinking about every text, every interaction, every shift in their energy. You were just living, and that's exactly what drew them in. But when emotional attachment formed, so did fear. Fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of being abandoned. That fear changes how you act. It makes you overthink. It makes you seek validation. And paradoxically, that energy pushes avoidance further away. Because avoidants don't respond to pressure, they respond to confidence. When you go no contact, the goal isn't just to make them feel your absence, it's to fill that space with your own growth. This is where you shift your energy away from them and onto yourself. You invest in your goals. You become more social. You develop new skills. You step into the version of yourself that is not waiting, but thriving. And when you do that, something incredible happens. First, they feel it. People can sense when you've emotionally detached, even if you never say a word. And second, you start to attract better. Whether it's them coming back on new terms or someone even more aligned with you, the energy you now carry draws people in. Because here's the secret: when you truly don't need someone, that's when they want to be around you the most. And the greatest shift of all: when they finally show up, you may realize you've outgrown them. That's when you know you've won, not because they returned, but because you became someone who doesn't need them to. The power of no contact goes far beyond just making an avoidant person return. It is about fundamentally shifting the dynamic of self-worth, attachment, and emotional strength. When you break the pattern of constantly reaching out, of waiting for their response, of making them the center of your emotional world, you don't just change how they see you, you change how you see yourself. You stop operating from a place of fear and start moving from a place of abundance. This is where true transformation happens, not only in your relationships, but in every aspect of your life. No contact isn't about silence for the sake of strategy. It's about stepping into your own power and giving both yourself and the avoidant the space to reassess what truly matters. At its core, this process forces the avoidant to experience the very thing they have spent their whole life trying to avoid: deep emotional reflection. When you remove yourself from the equation, they can no longer use your presence as a distraction. They are left alone with their thoughts, their emotions, and the realization that their need for space has come at a cost. And the longer that silence lingers, the more their subconscious starts working against them. Instead of feeling relief, they begin to feel the void, the uncertainty, and eventually the pull to return. But they don't return to pressure, to desperation, or to someone waiting in emotional limbo. They return to strength, to independence, to a person who has proven they are whole on their own. But the real magic happens when you realize that no contact was never about them in the first place. It was about giving yourself the time and space to grow, to rebuild, to reconnect with the person you were before attachment made you forget your worth. It is about shifting from the energy of pursuit to the energy of attraction, from needing someone to validate your presence to being someone whose presence is valued naturally. And in that shift, something incredible happens. You no longer crave the validation of the avoidant, because you have already given it to yourself. You no longer wait for them to show up because you have already arrived at the destination you were searching for all along: self-assurance, self-respect, and unshakable confidence. And this is why avoidants often come back, not because you manipulated them into missing you, but because they can feel the difference. They sense the emotional shift, the absence of neediness, the quiet power of someone who is detached from the outcome. Avoidants may fear closeness, but they are drawn to those who make closeness feel safe. And nothing is more attractive than a person who is emotionally secure, who is not trying to pull them in, but instead stands firm in their own identity. That is what makes them reconsider. That is what makes them realize they may have underestimated the depth of the connection they once resisted. But the greatest victory is not in their return, it is in the fact that by the time they come back, you may no longer need them too. Not because you've hardened yourself or closed your heart, but because you have evolved beyond the need for external validation. You now understand that true power lies in your ability to walk away when something no longer serves you. And when you reach that level of emotional mastery, the world shifts in your favor. Whether the avoidant returns or not is no longer the focus, because now you are no longer chasing anything. Instead, you are standing in your full power, allowing what is truly meant for you to flow naturally into your life. That is the ultimate transformation. That is the real victory. Thank you for taking the time to listen and reflect on this message. Growth, self-respect, and emotional strength are the real victories in any journey. And I hope this speech has given you a new perspective on your own power. Remember, you are not defined by who stays or who leaves. You are defined by how you choose to show up for yourself. If this message resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content that helps you step into your best self. Your journey to confidence and self-mastery is just beginning, and I'm honored to be a part of it. Thank you once again for your time and energy. Stay strong, stay focused, and keep moving forward. Until next time, take care and goodbye.